Dragging family into a debate isn't an argument. It's cowardice masquerading as politics. Senator John Neely Kennedy said, his voice low but resolute, slicing through the studio's charged air like a blade. The words hung heavy, a verdict delivered under the white-hot studio lights as the cameras zoomed in on a stunned Nancy Pelosi. The audience, caught off guard, let out a collective gasp that echoed through the packed room. Reporters in the press row froze mid-scribble, their pens hovering above notepads. The control room, buzzing with producers and floor managers, fell into a tense hush. That single sentence, spoken with calm precision, wasn't just a response. It was the opening salvo of a confrontation that would unravel on live television, leaving no one in the room untouched. But how did it come to this? What led to this moment where a seasoned politician like Pelosi found herself pinned under the weight of her own words, and Kennedy, ever composed, took control of the narrative without raising his voice. The stage was set in a sleek modern studio, its raised platform lined with 4 chairs under glaring lights that made every gesture visible to millions. Rows of cameras, like silent sentinels, framed the edges of the set, their red lights blinking in rhythm with the ticking segment clock. Behind a thick glass wall, producers waved hand signals, their headsets crackling with urgent whispers. The show, billed as a no-holds-barred roundtable on ethics in politics, had been hyped for days. Promos teased a clash between Nancy Pelosi, a political titan known for her sharp rhetoric, and Senator John Neely Kennedy, a figure celebrated for his incisive questioning and unshakable calm. Viewers at home, scrolling through their feeds or flipping channels, tuned in expecting sparks. They weren't disappointed. The segment opened with the band playing a quick, punchy sting, signaling the start of the debate. Nancy Pelosi, seated at the center of the panel, adjusted her notes with the confidence of someone who'd navigated countless high-stakes debates. Her tailored suit gleamed under the lights, and her practiced smile projected authority. Across from her, at the far end of the platform, sat Kennedy, his dark suit crisp, a slim folder resting on his knees. His expression was unreadable, his hands folded calmly, as if he were waiting for something inevitable. The moderator, a seasoned anchor with a knack for stirring tension, introduced the topic ethics in political lobbying. The audience clapped on cue, and the cameras panned across the panelists, capturing their poised expressions. Pelosi took the lead, her voice steady and commanding. She launched into a critique of lobbying practices, weaving in pointed jabs at Kennedy's voting record. Some senators, she said, her tone clipped, seem more interested in protecting corporate interests than serving the public. The audience murmured, a few clapping lightly. Reporters in the press row jotted down corporate interests with quick strokes. The band played a brief sting, and the split-screen feed showed Pelosi's animated gestures, contrasting with Kennedy's stillness. He didn't interrupt. He didn't flinch. His eyes stayed fixed on her as if measuring every word. The anchors off stage whispered, "He's letting her," run, their voices muffled, but caught by a nearby mic. Pelosi, sensing her momentum, leaned into her argument. She rattled off statistics about lobbying dollars, her hands slicing the air for emphasis. "The system rewards those who play the game," she said, "and Senator Kennedy's votes show he's a player." The audience chuckled politely, prompted by the floor manager's subtle nod. The cameras caught Kennedy's lips twitching, not into a smile, but something closer to patience. He adjusted his folder slightly, a small motion that went unnoticed by most, but caught the eye of a sharp-eyed producer. "He's waiting?" the producer muttered into her headset. The segment clock ticked past 3 minutes, and the debate seemed to be following its scripted rhythm, sharp, but safe, edgy, but controlled. Then came the pivot. Pelosi, emboldened by the audience's response, shifted her tone. Her voice took on a biting edge, and she leaned forward, eyes narrowing. And maybe, she said, pausing for effect, if Senator Kennedy spent less time posturing in hearings and more time at home, his wife might teach him a thing or two about integrity. The words landed like a thunderclap. The audience gasped before she even finished the sound, sharp and involuntary. The band's sticks hovered above the snare, but didn't strike. The laughter that had punctuated her earlier jabs died mid-breath. In the control room, producers leaned forward, eyes glued to the monitors. She went there. One whispered, her voice tight. The cameras swiveled, catching the split screen, Pelosi's confident smirk faltering for a fraction of a second, and Kennedy still motionless, his face a mask of calm. Mentioning a guest's family on live television wasn't a jab, it was a detonator. Once pressed, the countdown ran on its own. The studio fell into a heavy silence, broken only by the faint hum of the air system. Reporters in the back row circled wife comment in their notepads, drawing arrows to live TV. The anchors at the side desks exchanged glances, one muttering, "She crossed a line off mic." Pelosi, perhaps sensing the shift in the room, hesitated for a beat. Her hands tightened on her notes, and her eyes flicked toward the audience as if gauging their reaction. The other panelists, caught off guard, stared at their papers, unwilling to intervene. The segment clock blinked past 5 minutes, and the stage, once a platform for policy sparring, now felt like a tightrope. Kennedy adjusted his folder again, a deliberate motion that drew every eye in the room. He didn't speak yet, letting the silence stretch until it was almost unbearable. The red light on camera 3 blinked steadily, its lens trained on his face. The director voice, low in the headset, whispered, "Hold tight, shot." Pelosi shifted in her chair, her earlier confidence wavering. She opened her mouth, perhaps to soften her remark, but stopped short. The producers behind the glass exchanged urgent glances, their hands hovering over the controls. Nobody dared cut to commercial. The audience, still processing the shock, leaned forward, their murmurs fading into anticipation. Kennedy finally leaned toward his microphone, his movements slow and deliberate. The studio held its breath, the overhead boom mics picking up nothing but the soft hiss of the air system. "Nancy," he said, his voice steady and measured, "you just made my wife part of your argument. That wasn't policy. That was a mistake." The words were soft, but carried the weight of a gavel. Gasps rippled through the audience again, sharper this time. Reporters scribbled, "That was a mistake," in bold, their pens moving furiously. The anchors whispered, "He's setting the frame off mic." Pelosi's smile faltered, her hands clutching her notes a little tighter. The band remained silent, the sticks still hovering as if unsure whether to punctuate the moment. Pelosi tried to regain her footing. "Look," she said, her voice pitching higher, "we're talking about priorities here, accountability. If the senator can't handle a little pushback—" She trailed off, sensing the edge in her own tone. Kennedy didn't interrupt. He let her words hang exposed in the air. The cameras caught the flicker of doubt in her eyes as she glanced at the moderator, then back at Kennedy. The other panelists shifted uncomfortably, their notes untouched. The press row buzzed with activity phones lighting up as reporters typed out quick updates. Pelosi Goes Personal One tweeted the words, already spreading across social feeds. Kennedy opened his folder, the colored tabs catching the light. "Nancy," he said again, his tone unchanged, "you wrote last year that dragging families into debates is a losing tactic." "Your words, not mine." The audience murmured louder, a wave of recognition washing over them. Reporters underlined, "Your words, not mine," in their notepads. Pelosi blinked, her expression tightening. "That was a different context," she said quickly, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. Kennedy turned a page, his movements deliberate. "Context doesn't change a principle," he replied. You set a standard. You just broke it. Gasps cracked through the studio again, the sound like static in the air. The segment clock ticked toward 8 minutes, and the room felt smaller, the lights hotter. Pelosi, who had started the debate with polished confidence, now faced a spotlight she hadn't anticipated. Kennedy, still calm, had turned her own words into a mirror reflecting her misstep back at her. The producers in the control room whispered frantically, but the director held firm, keeping the cameras rolling. The audience, no longer clapping on cue, leaned forward, sensing the shift in power. What had begun as a routine panel discussion about ethics had become something else entirely, a live-wire confrontation where every word mattered, and Kennedy held the reins. Pelosi tried to pivot back to policy. "We're here to discuss ethics in lobbying," she said, her voice straining to sound authoritative. "This isn't about personal attacks." Kennedy didn't blink. "It wasn't," he said simply, "until you made it personal." The audience murmured again, phones rising to capture the moment. Reporters scribbled, "Made it personal," with arrows pointing back to wife comment. The anchors, now leaning forward in their seats, whispered, "He's got her off mic." The stage, once a platform for sparring, now felt like a courtroom, and Kennedy was building his case piece by deliberate piece. By the time the segment clock neared 10 minutes, the dynamic had shifted entirely. Pelosi, once in command, now scrambled to regain control. Kennedy, with his folder of evidence and unshakable calm, had set the stage for what was to come. The audience, the reporters, the producers, all waited for the next move. The red lights on the cameras blinked, capturing every second of a moment that was no longer just a debate, but a reckoning unfolding in real time. The studio air thickened with tension, the segment clock ticking relentlessly, as Senator John Neely Kennedy's words echoed through the room. Nancy Pelosi, her earlier poise cracking under the scrutiny, shifted in her seat, her notes now a crumpled shield. The audience, still reeling from the initial shock, leaned forward, their murmurs a low hum beneath the overhead lights. Reporters in the press row scribbled furiously, capturing every nuance of the unfolding drama. The producers behind the glass wall exchanged glances, their hands hovering over the controls, but no one dared interrupt. The red lights on the cameras blinked steadily, broadcasting the moment to millions. Kennedy, with his folder open and his expression unchanging, had seized the narrative, turning Pelosi's misstep into a platform for a measured, devastating counterattack. Kennedy leaned slightly toward his microphone, his voice calm but firm, carrying the weight of authority earned through years of public service. "Nancy," he said, "you've spoken out strongly against personal attacks in politics. In one of your statements, you said that political violence of any kind has no place in our society, especially when it targets families." He paused, letting the words sink in, his eyes locked on hers. The audience gasped softly, recognizing the reference to Pelosi's own experiences and public declarations. Reporters underlined political violence in their notes, drawing arrows to her earlier comment about his wife. The anchors off stage whispered, "He's using her own words," their voices barely audible. Pelosi's face tightened, her hands clasping together on the desk. She opened her mouth to respond, but Kennedy continued, his tone steady, like a professor elucidating a point. "You've emphasized time and again that families should be off-limits, that dragging them into debates undermines the very ethics we're here to discuss." He flipped a page in his folder, the sound crisp in the hushed studio. "In fact, you've called such tactics a form of cowardice that erodes public trust." And the words were drawn from her public record statements, made in interviews and speeches, where she condemned attacks on personal lives. The split-screen feed showed her expression shifting from confidence to defensiveness, while Kennedy remained composed, his preparation evident in every deliberate gesture. Trying to regain control, Pelosi interjected, her voice rising a notch. "Senator, that's not what I meant. We're talking about policy priorities here, not personal vendettas." She gestured emphatically, her notes fluttering slightly. The audience murmured, a few nodding in agreement, but many others glanced toward Kennedy, waiting for his reply. The band sticks, poised, held back, sensing the gravity of the exchange. Producers in the control room leaned closer to the monitors, one muttering, "This is gold, but risky." The segment clock passed 12 minutes, the debate no longer scripted, but alive with raw energy. Kennedy didn't rush. He closed his folder, momentarily folding his hands, as if considering her words. Then, with a slight nod, he reopened it. "Nancy, let's look at your record. You've said that when debates turn personal, especially involving families, it's a sign that the argument has been lost." He cited a specific instance from her public statements where she had defended the sanctity of family privacy in political discourse. The audience's murmurs grew louder, phones lighting up as viewers at home shared clips online. Reporters scribbled "argument lost" in bold, their pads filling with quotes. The cameras zoomed in on Pelosi's hands, now gripping the edge of the desk, her knuckles paling. Pelosi countered, her tone sharpening. "Those were general principles, Senator. Context matters in every discussion." She straightened her papers, attempting to steer back to the topic of ethics in lobbying. "We're here to talk about real issues affecting Americans, not to nitpick past remarks." But her voice carried a tremor, the earlier assurance waning. The other panelists, silent witnesses, exchanged sidelong glances, their own notes untouched. The floor manager, headset in place, signaled subtly to the moderator, but the exchange continued unchecked. Kennedy's response was swift, yet measured. "Context doesn't erase principles, Nancy. You've built a career on advocating for civility in politics, on keeping debates focused on facts, not families." He turned another page, his voice unwavering. "In one of your addresses, you stated that personal attacks, particularly on spouses and loved ones, have no place in our democracy." The words, pulled from her history of condemning such tactics, landed like quiet thunder. Gasps rippled through the audience again, sharper now. Reporters froze mid-scribble, then jotted "no place in democracy" with emphasis. The anchors whispered, "He's boxing her in," off mic. The studio felt smaller, the lights more intense as Pelosi struggled to pivot. "This is twisting my words," she said, her pitch climbing. "I was referring to extreme cases, not a simple comment on priorities." Her hands moved restlessly over her notes, shuffling them without purpose. The cameras captured the flicker of frustration in her eyes, contrasting with Kennedy's unflappable demeanor. He sat back slightly, allowing her response to echo, then leaned forward again. "If it's a simple comment, why did you make it? You've always insisted that leaders must model the behavior they preach." As the segment clock approached 15 minutes, the power dynamic had inverted completely. Pelosi, who had opened with bold critiques, now defended against her own contradictions. Kennedy, with his meticulous preparation and calm delivery, highlighted her inconsistencies without aggression. The audience, initially divided, now seemed swayed by his logic, their murmurs turning to nods of agreement. Producers debated in hushed tones, but the director kept the feed live, capturing the raw authenticity of the moment. Kennedy pressed on his voice, a steady anchor in the storm. "Nancy, you've warned that when politics turns personal, it distracts from the real work. Yet here we are, diverted by your choice to invoke my family." He cited another statement from her repertoire, reinforcing the theme of accountability. Pelosi's replies grew shorter, her attempts to redirect faltering. The press row buzzed with activity tweets flying about the masterclass in debate Kennedy was delivering. The other panelists, finally stirring, offered tentative support to Pelosi, but their interventions felt weak against his fortified position. Kennedy elaborated further, drawing from a broader array of her public comments. In a forum on political discourse, you argued that respecting personal boundaries is essential to maintaining the integrity of our institutions. He paused, allowing the audience to absorb the implication. The room's atmosphere grew even more charged, with spectators hanging on every word. Reporters added integrity of institutions to their notes, connecting it back to the ethics theme of the show. Pelosi, sensing the tide turning, tried a different tack. "Senator, we all say things in the heat of the moment, but let's refocus on the lobbying reforms needed for transparency." But Kennedy was undeterred. "Heat of the moment doesn't excuse hypocrisy, Nancy. You've championed the idea that words have consequences, especially for those in public office." He flipped to yet another tab in his folder, his preparation shining through. "Remember your call for unity where you said division starts when we stoop to personal levels." The audience's response was palpable, a wave of agreement rippling through the seats. Phones buzzed with notifications as the exchange went viral in real time. The anchors, now fully engaged, leaned in, one noting off mic, "This is redefining the debate." Pelosi's frustration mounted her voice, edging into exasperation. "You're cherry-picking quotes to suit your narrative. That's not fair play." She glanced at the moderator for intervention, but none came. The moment was too compelling to halt. Kennedy responded with characteristic poise. "These aren't cherries, Nancy. They're your own orchard. You've planted these ideas publicly, and now they're bearing fruit." The metaphor drew a few chuckles from the audience, lightening the tension momentarily, but underscoring his point. As the clock ticked past 20 minutes, the exchange deepened. Kennedy explored the philosophical underpinnings of Pelosi's past statements, linking them to broader themes of ethical leadership. "You've often spoken about the need for empathy in politics, about understanding that behind every public figure is a private life." He cited a speech where she had emphasized compassion. Pelosi, her defenses wearing thin, retorted, "Empathy goes both ways, Senator. Perhaps you should practice what you preach." But her words lacked punch, overshadowed by his consistent logic. The other panelists attempted to mediate, one saying, "Let's remember the topic at hand," but Kennedy smoothly integrated it. "The topic is ethics, and nothing speaks louder to ethics than consistency in one's principles." His words resonated, drawing applause from parts of the audience. Producers in the control room smiled. Despite the unpredictability, this was television at its most riveting. Kennedy continued to build his case, referencing more instances from Pelosi's extensive public record. "In discussions on media responsibility, you've criticized outlets for amplifying personal attacks." He turned the page slowly, each movement deliberate. "Yet, tonight, under these lights, you've amplified one yourself." Gasps returned, the audience fully invested. Reporters' notepads overflowed with phrases like "amplified one yourself," circled emphatically. Pelosi, her composure fraying, pushed back. "This is a setup, a distraction from the real issues." Her hands trembled slightly as she rearranged her notes. Kennedy, ever calm, replied, "The only setup is the one you created by crossing that line. You've always advocated for accountability. Now's the time to demonstrate it." By the time the segment clock neared 25 minutes, Pelosi's initial dominance had evaporated. Kennedy's strategic use of her own words had painted a picture of principled steadfastness on his part, contrasted with her evasions. The studio, buzzing with energy, anticipated the escalation, but Kennedy's counterattack had already reshaped the narrative, setting the stage for what was to come. The studio's atmosphere crackled with electric anticipation. the segment clock pushing forward as Senator John Neely Kennedy's methodical dismantling of Nancy Pelosi's position left the audience spellbound. Pelosi, her once commanding presence now shadowed by doubt, clutched her notes like a lifeline, her eyes darting between Kennedy and the moderator. Reporters in the press row typed furiously on their devices, the clatter of keys a subtle underscore to the drama. Producers behind the glass wall watched with bated breath, their whispers urgent but ineffective against the unfolding spectacle. The red camera lights pulsed like heartbeats, capturing every micro-expression for the viewers at home. Kennedy, his folder a repository of undeniable truths, prepared to elevate the confrontation with a revelation that would tighten the noose of inconsistency around Pelosi's arguments. Suddenly, a buzz rippled through the press row phones vibrating in unison as a push alert from a major news outlet broke the story. Internal memo leaked Pelosi labels family attacks in politics a serious political blunder. Gasps spread like wildfire across the studio, sharp and involuntary. Reporters froze mid-note, then scribbled internal memo in bold drawing arrows to serious political blunder. Anchors at the side desks leaned forward, one whispering off mic, "This changes everything." The floor manager slipped a printout onto the moderator's desk, just out of camera view, while the audience murmured louder, their curiosity piqued. Pelosi's eyes flicked to her own phone, hidden beneath her notes, her face paling as she registered the alert. Kennedy remained seated, his posture unchanged, hands folded over his folder. He didn't glance at the circulating printouts or acknowledge the growing chaos. Instead, he waited, allowing the murmurs to crest and subside his calm, a stark contrast to the storm brewing around him. The segment clock ticked past 28 minutes, the debate now far beyond its original bounds. The director in the control room held up a hand, signaling to keep rolling. No commercial break could interrupt this pivotal moment. The overhead lights seemed to burn brighter, casting long shadows across the stage. Finally, Kennedy leaned toward his microphone, his voice even and precise. "Nancy," he said, "while you've been here telling this audience that families are fair game in debate, your own internal memo calls that a serious political blunder. Which version should they believe?" The words landed with surgical accuracy, eliciting louder gasps from the audience. Reporters underlined "which version" in all caps, their pads filling rapidly. The split screen captured Pelosi's stunned expression, her lips parting, but no sound emerging. The band sticks, hovering, remained silent, the moment too grave for musical punctuation. Pelosi recovered enough to respond, her voice pitching higher with defensiveness. "That memo was private correspondence," she said quickly, "taken completely out of context. It's being misrepresented." She straightened in her chair, attempting to project authority, but her hands betrayed her trembling slightly as she adjusted her notes. The audience's murmurs grew a mix of surprise and skepticism. Phones in the gallery lit up further as social media exploded with reactions, hashtags trending in real time. The other panelists shifted uncomfortably, one glancing at the producer offstage for guidance that wasn't forthcoming. Kennedy didn't blink. He opened his folder to a new tab, the colored markers gleaming under the lights. "Private or public Nancy words carry weight. You wrote that attacking families in political discourse is not just unethical. It's a blunder that undermines credibility." He quoted directly from the leaked memo, his tone factual and unyielding. Gasps detonated again, the sound reverberating through the studio. Reporters circled "undermines credibility," with emphasis connecting it back to her initial jab at his wife. Anchors whispered, "He's got the memo?" How off-mic, their eyes wide. The revelation hung heavy, a time-stamped proof of hypocrisy that no spin could easily dispel. Pelosi tried to counter her words, tumbling out. This is an ambush, Senator. Leaking private documents isn't fair debate. She gestured toward the press row where reporters were now photographing the printouts. The cameras zoomed in on her face, capturing the flush creeping up her cheeks. Kennedy responded calmly, his voice a steady counterpoint. Ambush implies no evidence, Nancy. This is evidence you authored. You've always stressed accountability. Does that apply to everyone but you? As the clock approached 32 minutes, the tension coiled tighter. Pelosi's attempts to deflect only deepened the quagmire. The memo was about extreme cases, not a light comment on priorities, she insisted, her pitch climbing. But Kennedy was ready, turning another page. Your memo doesn't specify extremes. It calls any family involvement a blunder. You've set the standard. Now you're evading it. The audience murmured, louder nods of agreement spreading through the seats. Reporters scribbled, evading it, furiously, the press row a hive of activity. Pelosi pressed on, her frustration evident. You're using this leak to distract from the real ethics discussion. Lobbying reforms are what matter here. She shuffled her papers, trying to pivot back to policy, but the move felt desperate under the spotlight. Kennedy's reply was measured. Ethics start with consistency, Nancy. You've condemned these tactics in writing, yet employed them tonight. That's the distraction. His words, delivered without malice, amplified the irony, drawing more gasps. The other panelists finally interjected one, saying, perhaps we can clarify the memo's context, but Kennedy seamlessly integrated it. Context is clear. You labeled it a blunder. Denying it now only highlights the inconsistency. Pelosi's voice cracked slightly as she retorted, this is character assassination, not debate. Kennedy shook his head subtly. No, Nancy, this is holding a mirror to your own words. You've advocated for transparency. Let's practice it. By 35 minutes, the memo's impact had reshaped the narrative entirely. Pelosi, once the aggressor, now floundered in a web of her own making. Kennedy's use of the leak, not as a weapon, but as a tool for truth, showcased his preparation and integrity. The audience, fully engaged, leaned in, their initial shock evolving into thoughtful reflection. Producers debated cutting to break, but the director waved them off. This was unscripted gold. Kennedy delved deeper, referencing how the memo aligned with her public stances. In the memo, you warn that such blunders erode trust in leaders. Yet here, under these lights, you've committed one. Pelosi's defenses crumbled further. It's being twisted, she said, her hands gesturing wildly. But Kennedy remained unflappable. Twisted, these are your exact words. Accountability isn't selective. As the exchange intensified, the studio's hum grew, phones buzzing, reporters whispering, audience members shifting. Pelosi tried one last pivot. Let's focus on solutions, not past writings. Kennedy's response sealed the moment. Solutions require trust, and trust demands consistency. Your memo demands it. Will you honor it? By the time the clock neared 40 minutes, Pelosi's position was untenable, her contradictions laid bare. Kennedy's calm mastery of facts had turned her words into a vice, squeezing tighter with each revelation. The stage, once a forum for policy, now stood as a testament to the power of truth and preparation, with Kennedy guiding the discourse toward a profound reckoning. The studio hung in suspended silence, the weight of the leaked memo, and Senator John Neely Kennedy's unyielding logic pressing down like an invisible force. Nancy Pelosi, her notes scattered and her composure in tatters, sat frozen under the relentless glare of the lights. The audience, once buzzing with anticipation, now sat in rapt attention, their murmurs faded to nothing. Reporters in the press row paused, their frantic scribbling pens hovering as they awaited the final act. Producers behind the glass wall gestured wildly but held back, knowing this moment transcended the script. The segment clock ticked inexorably toward its end, each second amplifying the drama. Kennedy, his folder now closed, prepared to deliver the closing statement that would seal the encounter, leaving an indelible mark on all who witnessed it. Kennedy adjusted his microphone one last time, his movements deliberate, and composed a testament to his steadfast character. He leaned forward slightly, his voice low but resonant, carrying to every corner of the room. "Nancy," he said, "you've had every opportunity to steer this back to policy, to honor the principles you've championed for so long. Instead, you chose to cross a line you've repeatedly drawn yourself." The words were not shouted, but spoken with quiet authority, each one landing like a carefully placed stone. Gasps trickled through the audience, soft but pervasive. Reporters underlined "cross a line" in their notes, sensing the culmination approaching. The anchors whispered off mic, "This is the verdict," their eyes fixed on the stage. Pelosi opened her mouth to interject, her voice emerging strained and defensive. "Senator, this has been blown out of proportion. We're public figures. Scrutiny comes with the territory." She gestured weakly toward the cameras, her hands unsteady. But Kennedy didn't allow the deflection to take root. He continued, his tone unwavering. "Scrutiny of actions and policies, yes. But families, you've said it yourself, that's where integrity falters." He referenced her broader advocacy for respectful discourse, drawing from her history of promoting unity without aggression. The split screen captured her faltering expression against his resolute gaze, a visual narrative of shifting power. As the clock passed 42 minutes, Kennedy built toward his final point, weaving in the threads of the entire exchange. "Your memo, your speeches, your columns, they all paint a picture of a leader who values boundaries. Yet tonight, you ignored them. That inconsistency isn't just a slip. It's a choice." The audience nodded subtly, phones dimmed as they absorbed the gravity. Reporters scribbled, "Inconsistency is a choice," their pads nearly full. Pelosi tried one more response. "Choices in the heat of debate don't define us." But her words lacked conviction, echoing hollowly in the charged air. Kennedy paused, letting the silence underscore her reply. Then, with finality, he delivered the line that would echo beyond the studio. "Dragging family into a debate isn't an argument. It's cowardice masquerading as politics." The statement hung in the air, a profound summation that resonated deeply. Gasps erupted anew, louder and more unified. Reporters tore across their notes with "cowardice masquerading as politics," in all caps, recognizing it as the kill shot. The band remained silent, the moment too solemn for interruption. Pelosi's face drained of color, her hands clasping the armrests as if to steady herself. With that, Kennedy rose from his chair, buttoning his jacket with calm precision. He nodded politely to the moderator, and the panel, his demeanor gracious, even in victory. His footsteps echoed softly across the stage as he walked off, leaving the lights and the lingering tension behind. The moderator cleared his throat, attempting to wrap up, but the words stalled. The producer behind the glass finally signaled the cut, but the director held the shot a few seconds longer, capturing Pelosi alone on the stage, her expression a mix of shock and reflection under the harsh lights. As the network faded to commercial, the narrative crystallized. What began as a round table on ethics had transformed into a masterclass in accountability, with Kennedy emerging as the embodiment of principled leadership. His calm, fact-based approach had not only defended his family, but illuminated the importance of consistency in public life. Viewers at home, scrolling through clips that were already viral, pondered the exchange long after the broadcast ended. But beyond the drama, this encounter offers profound lessons for all of us. Words hold immense power. They can build bridges or burn them down. In the heat of debate, especially in public arenas, it's crucial to remember that responsibility accompanies every statement. Kennedy's response teaches us that true strength lies not in volume or vitriol, but in measured truth and unwavering principles. Consistency between what we say and what we do is the cornerstone of credible leadership. When we preach civility, we must practice it. When we draw lines, we must respect them. Moreover, respecting personal boundaries in public discourse preserves the integrity of our conversations. Involving families or private lives doesn't strengthen an argument. It weakens the debater's position and erodes trust. This story reminds us to pause and reflect before speaking, to consider the impact of our words on others and on our own reputation. In an era of heated exchanges and instant judgments, embracing these values fosters healthier discussions and stronger communities. Think about your own interactions. Have you ever crossed a line in an argument? How did it affect the outcome? Learning from moments like this encourages us to strive for better, to model the respect we demand. Kennedy's handling of the situation exemplifies how grace under pressure can turn adversity into an opportunity for education. As we move forward, let's carry this lesson. Lead with integrity, debate with dignity, and always align actions with words. In doing so, we not only honor ourselves but elevate the discourse around us.